Today, I want to share with you guys a conversation that I had with one of my old organic chemistry professors. He was saying that post-COVID led to a lot of online materials being available and accessible to students. So students have the ability to watch videos of problems being explained. They have the ability to watch videos of the content of the lecture material, so on and so forth. So have a dearth of information and material that they can lean on to explain the concepts. But because of that, there has been a rise in a problem with those students. They are depending so much on those explanation videos that they are not actually struggling with the ideas themselves. And therefore, they're not learning how to reproduce the right answers. And so the analogy that I give with this is a newborn baby. Every time a newborn baby cries, a mom will eventually run to soothe them, right? And so they start to realize the link between crying and being soothed, right? And so what happens is if a mom does this too long, the baby doesn't learn to self-soothe. They use the mother or the father as a crutch to soothe themselves instead of learning how to be able to soothe themselves on their own. And so students are doing much the same. By depending on all of these videos, these lecture materials, and so on and so forth that are available online, they're not struggling with the ideas themselves. So there's a spectrum. You are here with frustration or there with safety. And so you have to struggle with the material enough, but if you're too frustrated, you won't continue the learning process. So you want to find a sweet spot. If you're getting the explanations from TAs, professors, and videos on everything, what happens is you're not actually making the connections on your own. You're watching somebody else make the connections. So you want to find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. That's where the learning happens. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Can't be too uncomfortable because then you'll just phase out. Your mind will wander. You'll get overwhelmed. But if it's too safe, you're not actually learning either. And so you got to find somewhere, some middle ground in between. A good sign that you're learning is a little bit of frustration, but pushing through that frustration. And another story that I want to share that illustrates this point is a story of what I used to do previously as a tutor. When I would tutor students, they would come to me and ask me to explain problem 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, right? And I would explain it to them one after the next, after the next, after the next. And every time it would look like, oh wow, they're clicking, they're understanding it. There are signs that their face is really processing the material. But then what I realized is the moment I would ask them to solve a problem on their own, they would make so many mistakes that it's almost as if I was teaching them nothing. They started from really scratch and they were getting the most basic things wrong. So what I realized to do instead is have the student solve the problem, and then when they would get it wrong, I would point out their mistakes. That trial and error process of getting things wrong and then getting it corrected right away with immediate feedback, that was where the learning happened. And so whenever they would get something wrong, I would have them do a very similar problem and try again. And they would get it wrong again. And then I would recorrect it. And then another problem, they would try again. And eventually they would get the problems all right. With enough corrections in their mistakes, that's where the learning happened. And it was very uncomfortable for them to commit ideas down to paper and watch them get torn apart one after the next. Here's a mistake. There's a mistake. You moved the arrow in the wrong direction. You didn't circle the negative charge. You don't understand the reaction at all. You're not realizing that it's a carbon-carbon bond formation and you created a carbon-oxygen bond formation. So by correcting one problem after the next of the same idea, eventually they got the idea down. Getting explanations left and right via YouTube video, via your professor, via your TA is not the way. That's a crutch, and it creates a false sense of confidence that you know the material. You have to struggle with it. You got to get to the level where you can reproduce the correct answer, where you have that autonomy and independence to succeed.